I'm not sure if most people are aware of this or not, but the original Creature Commandos looked quite different to the team we saw in their hit show. The original team consisted of some generic horror characters, a vampire, Vincent Velcro, a werewolf, Warren Griffith, a Gorgon, Myrna Rhodes, and a reanimated corpse a la Frankenstein's monster, Elliot Taylor. It was a decent idea, a war comic where the main heroes were versions of classic movie monsters, but I think I prefer the more recent version that features an eclectic team of established characters like Weasel and Dr. Phosphorus. The character I want to talk about today is the Bride, and I think she's one of the most interesting characters in the show. Like her teammates, she has virtually no interest in her mission, but by the series' end, she has something that resembles a breakthrough. Now, I know that some of you watch my videos with your children, but remember that Creature Commandos is an adult-rated show with scenes of violence and sexual content. By all means, stick around to hear about the character's literary origins, but once I get to the show, it gets a bit heavy and may not be suitable for younger viewers. Most of you will probably know that the Frankenstein characters in this show originated in Mary Shelley's gothic novel, Frankenstein. The very brief summary of the novel is that scientist Victor Frankenstein sought to defy death by reanimating a creature assembled from various corpses. While he was successful, the monster, as he referred to himself, lamented his lonely existence and asked his creator to build a wife for him. However, this bride never had the chance to exist because Frankenstein, horrified by the thought of his first creation having a companion, refused to bring her to life. There's a parallel in the book between the bride and Victor's own wife Elizabeth, who had been adopted by his parents for the sole purpose of one day marrying him. It was a different time, I guess, back when women didn't have agency and were just bartered off for the gratification of the man they were given to. The fact that both she and the monster were assembled from stolen corpses was a violation in its own right, but this original version of her was denied her existence. And yet, despite being little more than a concept in the novel, the Bride became an enduring character thanks primarily to Universal's classic horror film, The Bride of Frankenstein. A key thing about the movie version is that she was brought to life, and she rejected her groom-to-be. At the film's climax, the monster kills himself, the bride, and the mad scientist that had instigated the whole thing, Dr. Pretorius, by blowing up the lab, which isn't exactly a healthy way to deal with rejection. Keep that in mind for later on. While Frankenstein's monster has appeared several times across the decades in DC Comics, usually as a ploy to attract more casual readers that were familiar with the old horror films, DC eventually brought the character into the fold properly. In 2007, writer Grant Morrison wrote a miniseries starring Frankenstein's monster, calling him Frank, as part of their 7 Soldiers of Victory series. Unlike the earlier Creature Commandos member, Frank was the same monster that had been in Shelley's novel, and he is now a monster hunter. His bride made her debut in the 3rd issue of that series. This comic book version of the Bride was quite similar to the Universal horror film version. She was intended to be a companion for the monster and even took his name. She was Lady Frankenstein. Here, Lady Frankenstein wasn't just a footnote in Frankenstein's story. She was a fully realized character with her own identity, her own skills, and her own mission. Unlike Shelley's version, she wasn't just a passive creation. In a departure from what came before, the pair seemed to get along at first. However, she eventually rejected her purpose and refused to be defined by it, setting off on her own. Where Frank embraced his monstrous nature and became a slayer of beasts, Lady Frankenstein carved out her own identity. She was arguably stronger, faster, and perhaps more notably, more emotionally intelligent than Frank. If he represented rage and vengeance, Lady Frankenstein represented resilience and autonomy. Generally speaking, Lady Frankenstein isn't the most significant character. I don't think she's appeared in more than a couple of dozen comics in the near 20 years of her existence, and so this makes her ripe for reinvention. One of the things I really enjoyed about the animated Creature Commandos is the way that James Gunn took these assorted characters, many of whom were complete unknowns, and reimagined them as bitter, broken people that found themselves having to do the right thing, even if that right thing was morally objectionable. While much of the present-day story presents the bride as an unwilling leader, her backstory is an emotional roller coaster of abuse and degradation. Much like the other versions, the bride was created to be the mate for Victor Frankenstein's monster, although in this show the monster has a name, Eric. I will talk about Eric a lot more in a future video, but the quick summary is that he is essentially a dateless loser that yearns for sexual contact. So he turns to his creator Victor Frankenstein to demand that he creates a mate for him, one that he selects the body parts to create his ideal woman. Eric is absolutely certain that once his bride comes to be, she will immediately fall in love with him, and the two will know carnal bliss. However, when she is born, so to speak, she has the mindset of an infant and is terrified of Eric's hideous, rotting face. Eric cannot grasp this and demands that she submit to his desires. At this point, Victor steps in, telling Eric that it'll take time before she's ready, and he begins educating her. He acts like a father to her, teaching her to speak and the names of everyday objects, and the bride loves him as a child would love their father. But Victor takes advantage of her. Sure, she has the body of a fully grown woman, but she is vulnerable like a child. It may well seem like a consenting relationship, but children cannot consent to relationships with adults. Again, creating her by stealing deceased women's body parts was a violation in its own right, and intending her to be a sex doll for Eric is equally gross. But turning her into his mistress, keeping her away in his lab in secret, is a repulsive violation and an abuse of his power over her. It probably doesn't need to be said, but Victor Frankenstein is the villain here. He may act kind, giving her gifts and showing her affection, but this is grooming behaviour. And it's clear that the bride has complex feelings about this relationship. She did love Victor, or she felt what she thought was love, but he was abusing her. This is partly why the bride finds it difficult returning to Frankenstein's lab in the present day. Victor also betrayed his son, Eric, taking the bride for himself when he already had a wife and family. And I don't feel a lot of sympathy for Victor when Eric decided to kill him, even though he was acting out of jealousy. This doesn't make Eric a hero by any means. He is a jealous stalker who tries to force himself on the bride, but she rejects him, setting fire to their home, and Eric, before running away into the night. We see that over the following decades, Eric pursues the bride, but she firmly rejects his advances and beats him senseless time and time again. I have to wonder if she only ended up in Belle Reve prison as a way to get away from him. As strong as he is, I don't think he'd be able to break into the prison without suffering the consequences. But the bride isn't exactly an enthusiastic participant in Task Force M, Amanda Waller's new squad of non-human soldiers. In her many years of life, the bride has clearly mastered many forms of combat, and almost manages to take out the witch Circe on her own, but she isn't invincible. There's a stark contrast between the bride and her squadmate Nina Mazursky. Where the bride is closed off and cold, Nina yearns to make friends. They're both very clearly lonely, but they have different responses to their feelings. Nina looks up to the bride and follows her every order, which gets her into trouble on more than one occasion. The bride didn't ask for this position, and she certainly doesn't want it, but leadership comes naturally to her. She's pragmatic, resourceful, and in many ways the most level-headed member of the team. So she's a natural choice to lead the team after Rick Flag is incapacitated by Clayface. She even manages to stave off the unwanted advances of Eric once more, all while taking part in a covert operation to assassinate the Princess of Pokolistan. Her initial plan of having Nina stab the princess while she swam backfired, resulting in Nina's death, which devastated her. However, the bride got a measure of revenge when she uncovered the princess's deception and killed her herself by shooting her in the head. Despite acting as an aloof drunk, when push comes to shove, the bride always defends the weak. She protected Nina from the bullies in Belle Reve, and saved a group of sex workers from their intoxicated, abusive, superpowered clients. It wouldn't make up for the abuse that she had endured, but it certainly made her feel a bit better. While she clearly took satisfaction in killing the princess, once the mission was complete she began to weep, likely for the first time in decades, with only Dr. Phosphorus to comfort her. I'm not entirely certain that Weasel knew what was happening at the time. As a reward for a job well done, the bride was appointed the new leader of Task Force M and introduced to her new squad mates at the end of the series. And you know what? She seemed quite happy about it. Creature Commandos' version of the bride is more than just a reanimated corpse. She's someone who was denied a purpose and instead made her own. From a concept erased in the pages of Mary Shelley's novel to a fully developed complex leader in Creature Commandos, the bride's journey is one of self-determination and healing. Whether in the comics or in animation, she's proof that even those written off as objects can forge their own paths. and that leadership doesn't always come from those who seek it. Really, it seeks them. She may have been created to be nothing more than someone's mate, and was undeniably a victim of abuse on multiple levels, but she didn't let that define her. She faced her problems head on, and shot them in the face. Okay, that's it for this week's essay. If you liked the video, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, leave a comment, tell all your friends about me. You know how YouTube works. If you really enjoyed the video and have the means, please consider making use of the thanks button to send a buck or two my way, because every little helps. I offer channel memberships for $1.99 a month. This will get you early access to my weekly video essay, priority responses to your comments, members-only videos, custom emojis, and an icon on your profile indicating that you're one of my people. And special thanks to my channel members. Everyone who was a member at the time of this video's creation is listed on the screen right now. If you want to see your name amongst all these wonderful people, join the channel now. Next time, I'll be back on Friday to talk about one of the headline members of Batman Beyond's Justice League Unlimited, the Apocalyptian Big Barda. And next Monday, it's time to go back to my villains from The Batman poll, to talk about how this show took one of Batman's most cerebrally and physically dominating foes and turned him into little more than a grunting action figure. Hope to see you then.